Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. The United States has formally agreed to help South Korea develop nuclear-powered submarines, marking a major shift in what's long been a red line. In a joint statement, the leaders of both countries also reaffirmed the need for the complete denuclearization of North Korea. And North Korea stayed silent at first, but now it's issued a carefully worded response, low in profile but sharply critical of key military provisions. At the same time, North Korean troops are working alongside Russian forces, and labor exports continue despite sanctions. With China, Russia, and North Korea moving closer, what we're seeing may be more than scattered signals. It could be the early shape of something more coordinated. So for a deeper discussion on this, we connect to Chung Gu-yeon, an associate professor of political science at Kangwon National University. A big welcome, Professor.
Thank you for having me today.
And also joining us is Frank Januzzi, President and CEO at the Marine and Mike Mansfield Foundation. Good to see you.
Good evening.
So let's start our discussion with Mr. Januzzi. So the U.S. has formally agreed to support South Korea's nuclear-powered submarine program. And what does this shift actually signal about the current threat landscape in the region? And why do you think it's been agreed upon right now?
Well, thank you for the question. This is both a signal about the U.S. ROK strategic integration and the depth of trust between the two nations, as well as a comment on the emerging threat environment, both from China as well as North Korea in Northeast Asia. On the level of strategic trust and industrial integration, this agreement, it goes far beyond just the provision of nuclear-powered submarines developed jointly by the United States and South Korea. The United States has also opened the door to nuclear spent fuel reprocessing and uranium enrichment. And although the details on that portion of the industrial integration of the two countries remain to be worked out, this marks a major change in the U.S. posture. It echoes the kind of relationship that Ambassador Mike Mansfield famously negotiated with Japan back in the 1980s when Japan gained full mastery over the nuclear fuel cycle. So it is both a deepening of the U.S. ROK trusting alliance, but also a response to North Korea's own pursuit of the potential for nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, as well as the existence of China's nuclear-powered ballistic missile fleet, which has complicated U.S. strategic thinking across Northeast Asia and required a coordinated response. And while some may say that this represents an escalation on the part of the United States and South Korea, I really think it is an adaptation to the existing threat environment and also an acknowledgement of where that threat may be headed in the future.
Right. It is indeed a big departure from past policy, especially given how sensitive this issue in many countries are focusing on. Now, building on that, the joint fact sheet didn't stop at just submarines. It also reaffirmed the need for the full denuclearization of North Korea as well. So in practical terms, Professor Chung, what kind of leverage does this language give Seoul and Washington?
Well, first, reaffirming the term full denuclearization of North Korea prevent the conversation between two allies from drifting toward arms control kind of arrangements that Pyongyang prefers. And also, I think two allies also had a similar kind of concern before they met in this year. But now two countries share the allied and the state. It reduced the risk of policy divergence between Seoul and Washington when structural pressure intensifies. And another leverage is the language. The language provides a normative leverage by reinforcing the global expectations, which is embedded in the UN Security Council resolution, that North Korea's nuclear status cannot be accepted or normalized, which therefore it strengthens the sanction legitimacy, which make it harder for China and Russia to argue that sanction regime is outdated and should be relaxed. But the more important thing is that it gives the Allies strategic justification for deepening extended deterrence measures, including nuclear consultation and strategic asset rotations and trilateral data sharing. Also, by linking this military upgrade of nuclear-powered submarine to denuclearization, Seoul and Washington can frame their action as defensive and conditional, not as escalatory.
Right. But despite this development, there's also a stark disconnect here. President Trump recently said North Korea already has many nuclear weapons, and now Pyongyang's latest commentary has openly reaffirmed its status as a nuclear-armed state. Mr. Januzzi, how does this sharpen the contradiction between Washington's denuclearization language in the fact sheet and the strategic reality of North Korea's asserting?
Well, you have put your finger on the key issue here. There is a disconnect, both in terms of the U.S. rhetoric, as well as potentially inside the Trump administration, in terms of the depth of the commitment to actually trying to accomplish the complete denuclearization of North Korea. Let's be clear, even the most ambitious advocates for denuclearization have long accepted that denuclearization would be a process and not a moment. It would take years, and it would begin with halting the production of new nuclear weapons, capping the existing arsenal, and then working gradually over time to reduce and dismantle North Korea's nuclear weapons architecture. But when the fact sheet talks about denuclearization of the North Korea, it really is out of step with the reality that President Trump personally seems to have accepted. President Trump seems to have accepted the reality that we have been living with a nuclear-armed North Korea for nearly 20 years, and that eliminating that arsenal will not happen in his lifetime. Living with contradictions is part of what all of us do when we study North Korea. There can be the goal of the complete denuclearization of the North Korean state, but recognizing that that goal will not be accomplished easily or quickly is an important acknowledgement of reality when dealing with a state which has now written their nuclear capacity into their constitution. So yes, there's a contradiction. It's a contradiction that exists both between the United States and South Korea and our desire to see North Korea denuclearize, but it also exists inside the governments of both countries, South Korea and the United States, as they debate how best to pursue the goal of the eventual denuclearization, perhaps not just of North Korea, but of the Korean Peninsula. So we have a long way to go on this journey, and this language represents a hardening of the position of the U.S. government, but it doesn't mean that President Trump will stick to that language if and when he has the opportunity to sit down with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
Right, a very important message that you've highlighted. Denuclearization is a process, not a moment. So there should be a lot of things that will follow suit, and we'll have to keep our eyes close to that. Now, let's also shift a little bit to Pyongyang's response to the fact sheet. It took them 4 full days to respond. North Korea has now issued its first official reaction through a calibrated North Korean Central News Agency commentary and not a high-level statement after the fact sheet was announced. Professor Chung, what does this controlled, kind of low-tier response tell us about Pyongyang's intentions?
Yeah, I think it is quite noticeable response from North Korea, and also it was pretty interesting to see how they are reacting to this development between U.S. and ROK. So I think North Korea kept its response at the KCNE commentary level rather than issuing a top-level statement by leadership. I think it shows 2 things. First one is Pyongyang is deliberately keeping its option open by avoiding a high-level statement by leadership or higher-ranking officials. North Korea is showing displeasure about the new development between 2 allies, but while refusing to lock itself into escalatory path. So it's kind of intentional options to show their response in that way. The second reason is that it didn't want to make China and Russia uncomfortable or push them into reacting before they are ready. So North Korea's response reflects Pyongyang's desire to stay aligned with Russia and China, which raised a lot of discussions about their triangle relationship. But this four-day pause gave North Korea time to watch how Beijing and Moscow will react before shaping its own message. So this is very cautious tone and cautious way and set the end of their response to this current development, which actually helped the North Korean regime to stay in step with both capital, Beijing and Moscow, while signaling displeasure without overcommitting itself to the development.
Right. So as of now, they're keeping cautious stance in relation to their partners as well. But more deeper into the context, Professor Chung, North Korea's response specifically criticized elements of the fact sheet related to the extended deterrence and Washington's support for Korea's nuclear-powered submarine program. What does Pyongyang's focus on these military provisions suggest about its threat perception and also how seriously it views the ROK-U.S. alliance?
Well, North Korea decided to single out the extended deterrence part, and also South Korea's potential nuclear power submarine program shows that it views those two elements most threatening to its military strategy and capability. By highlighting those provisions, Pyongyang is signaling that it sees the ROK-U.S. alliance shifting toward capability that actually erode its missile mobility and concealment and second strike capability. So the focus also reveals the genuine anxiety, I think. Alliance upgrades are becoming structural and long-term, not just symbolic gesture limited to Trump administration. As you said, as we discussed, this developing nuclear power submarine takes a long time, not just technically, but also we have to go through a number of congressional review as well as a bureaucratic kind of adjustments. So it is a long-term kind of cooperative project. So in that sense, it is kind of structural development between two allies, not just symbolic gesture. So that actually challenges North Korea's threat perception as well. So this suggests that Pyongyang takes this new posture between two allies very seriously enough to treat it as a real constraint on its coercive option, which is nuclear weapons. So the selective criticism shows that it feels its real threat to its core deterrent and operational freedom, which has been kind of enjoyed, are being constrained now.
Mm-hmm. So as all of these events unfold on the ground, North Korean military engineers are reportedly working alongside Russian troops on frontline demining missions. Mr. Januzzi, how significant is this cooperation and how is it viewed globally?
Well, I think Dr. Chung has identified a really critical issue here when she spoke to how the North Koreans are viewing the U.S.-ROK alliance. Indeed, the strategic commitment necessary to develop nuclear-powered submarines over perhaps a decade has sent a signal to North Korea that they also must consolidate and strengthen their strategic relationship with Moscow. Cooperation on demining, while it may seem like a small issue, is certainly relevant to the Korean Peninsula, where the Ottawa Convention banning international landmines is essentially not enforced because the United States has refused to sign that treaty. And there are landmines deployed as part of the defensive posture of the U.S.-ROK joint forces on the Korean Peninsula. So working with Russia on demining techniques and technology sort of reflects a deepening integration of North Korean and Russian military capabilities at a time when all of those relations are technically a violation of UN sanctions. I think it underscores both the growing depth of the relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang, but also a pretty defiant posture when it comes to the United States and ROK in terms of attempting to put any real substance into the international sanctions regime. While it would be nice to think that an issue like demining was merely tactical, I think it's part of a larger realignment in the region and one that is being orchestrated by North Korea in order to ensure a level of strategic support from Moscow that can give them the economic and military capabilities that they believe they need to ensure their defense posture on a peninsula where they are outnumbered and outgunned.
Right, so we're actually seeing continued cooperation in deepening ties between Pyongyang and Moscow. Now, this brings us to the broader alignment. Professor Chung, you've also mentioned, and also some analysts also say that Pyongyang's response was calibrated to allow time to observe how China and Russia also react to it. So in that context, how should we interpret the accelerating military alignment between North Korea and Russia within the broader North Korea, China, Russia triangle?
Well, it is true that the North Korea and Russia are accelerating their military alignment, which seems to show their deepening partnership. But I think it remained embedded in the larger triangle where China still plays a central stabilizing role. And at the same time, within that triangle, there is a hierarchy between three countries. And Pyongyang calibrated response shows that it is trying to strengthen ties with Moscow without alienating Beijing, which remains a primary economic and political lifeline. But Russia offers North Korea new leverage, as Janusz mentions, military technology and political cover and wartime relevance. But this cooperation is still opportunistic and shaped by Russia's needs in Ukraine. But China tolerated the growing DPRK and Russia cooperation, but is wary of being pulled into a more confrontational bloc, as we all worry, the triangle between United States-led and China-led. But you cannot really control that triangle confrontation. So taking all this together, the triangle alignment is hardening at the Russia-North Korea part, but it remained very fluid and asymmetric at the triangle level, especially from the China perspective.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's also touch upon the human rights dimension as well. South Korea has rejoined the UN North Korean Human Rights Resolution after years of absence. Well, this time, Washington has not signed this time around. Mr. Januzzi, what does this split actually tell us about the current dynamics between values and strategy?
Well, values and strategy are linked, but the Trump administration, the first time around, and now in its second iteration, has shown a desire to put primacy on issues of national security and economic security, while integrating human rights values, concepts of democracy and human rights, only where it is more convenient and easy to do so. And on the Korean Peninsula, these issues have long been complicated and fraught. So the Trump administration has been pretty clear that they are not going to be engaging and mirroring the values diplomacy of the Biden team. There won't be any summits of democracies held in Washington, D.C. During the next 3 years. And I think that the Trump administration is taking a much more practical approach to trying to advance U.S. interests on the Korean Peninsula. And that the human rights values that President Lee Jae-myung has long celebrated as a part of his political life are not likely to be front and center with the Trump administration. I don't think this necessarily places the two allies in a awkward situation, but it does reflect different priorities for the two leaders and the two countries.
Right, it definitely seems to show a real revealing gap between the two allies. Now, we've discussed a lot of topics today, so when we put all of this together, military alignment, regime survival strategies, and diplomatic signaling, Professor Chung, do you think it's the moment that signals the start of a hardened authoritarian counteraxis, or are we still in the face of fluid strategic experimentation? What are your thoughts?
It's a hard question, but what we are seeing is not yet a fully formed authoritarian counteraxis, I think. But it is more than casual tactical coordination as we observe the current progress between North Korea and Russia. This partnership is clearly hardening, driven by, as I mentioned, wartime needs in Ukraine and shared hostility toward the United States and United States-led orders in the Northeast Asia. But China remains cautious, as I mentioned, supporting Pyongyang's stability while avoiding commitment that would lock it into Moscow's confrontational posture toward the United States. So, as I said, this leaves the triangle very asymmetrical, and within asymmetric relations, there is a hierarchy as well. Relatively tight between Moscow and Pyongyang, but still very flexible and conditional with Beijing. So overall, I think we are structuring strategic experimentation, but not in a fixed block yet. But the trend is getting harder and harder, I think.
Definitely,
It's a great point. And I think the next shoe to drop is going to be U.S.-China, because watch that space, because President Trump wants some outreach to President Xi Jinping of China.
Right. Very big thing to look forward to between the two superpowers as well. But as for now, we'll have to conclude our discussion here at this point. Thank you so much for your insights, Mr. Januzzi.
Thank you so much.
And of course, Professor Chung, we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.